there is a tendency to treat automation as almost like a wizardry cult. It's so complicated that only a select few of us could possibly understand how this stuff works. There are those kinds of decisions that you can make that have zero impact on the cost, but huge impact on safety. And so my inspiration was really more on the control side initially of like, I think it would be cool if we could come up with a generic enough control that, you could just buy like a black box from us, that, you could just buy like a black box.
Welcome to the StageLync podcast, your access and connection to the live performing arts. In this podcast, you'll hear from some of the industry's most inspiring people from around the globe who create magic on stage and backstage. Our guests share their knowledge, passion, and the real stories of how a show comes together. We hope you enjoy this episode.
Welcome to the StageLync podcast, your connection to the performing arts. My name is Kat Landry.
And my name is Anna Aguilera.
You can learn more about us on Instagram at StageLync, StageLync. Today, we're talking with Gareth Conner.
Gareth is a small business owner focused on delivering elegant scenic automation products to the entertainment industry. He strives to bring wondrous effects to every production, big or small. Specializing in product development, programming, electronic circuit design, machine design, he is also the author of the Scenic Automation Handbook. Hi, Gareth. Welcome to the show.
Hi, thanks for having me.
We're excited to have you. It's an honor.
Yeah, I'm looking forward to it.
It's not every day you get to talk to the guy who actually wrote the book on stage automation.
Yeah. Or at least one of the books, for sure. Yeah.
Well, tell us a little bit about yourself, Gareth. We've just read your bio, but we'd love to hear in your own words. Who are you? How did you get here? What's your story?
Yeah, exactly. What is it? So I have a small company in Rhode Island called Creative Conners. We've been in business for 20 years now, and we make stage automation products. And the I guess rolling back to why I started doing this, I've always been fascinated in scenic automation. That's been kind of the passion for me since the days of working legitimately in the theater. The impetus for creating the company was really that I wanted to make an automation company that wasn't focused on bespoke automation. It felt like there was a lot of that already available. Like if you were doing big Vegas spectacles or Broadway, there were plenty of really great companies already serving those markets. But I had kicked around in the regional theater circuit for quite a while. Quite a while. I mean, when you're young, everything feels like quite a while. For many months, I worked in regional theater. And I was always taken with how many really brilliant technicians were working at that level and doing automation, but they were often doing it kind of rolling their own stuff. And I thought it would be really cool to make a product line that was more like kind of Lego blocks, that kind of like how we order rigging equipment or, traveler tracks, things like that, where it's like you have a catalog of components, you want to put together the exact system you want out of these base components. And I thought, wouldn't it be great if you could do automation that way, where it's like, you basically always have the same rough things. Like you've got some sort of machine, you've got some, some control device, you've got some software, and can I just kind of plug and play? And so that was the impetus for it. When I started the company, I was actually working, I guess right before I started the company, I was working for somebody else at the time. I was working for Mystic Scenic up in Boston. And I actually pitched the idea to my bosses there. I was like, what we will do, because we had an automation system there as well at Mystic Scenic. And it was my boss used to cringe every time I'd say it, but like our system was just as expensive as everybody else's, but it was a little bit worse. And I was like, I bet you, which is a really tough sales pitch, And I was like, I bet you we could make it more affordable. Like, I'm not sure we could make it a whole lot better. We could make it more affordable if we kind of went back and designed these things from the kind of component level up. So if we like really dug deep on the engineering side and developed our own circuitry, like using our own microcontrollers and stuff, and wrote our own firmware, we could kind of craft a product right for the entertainment market rather than adapting like industrial automation to the entertainment business. And I was very impassioned about it, but my boss was like, that's the worst idea I've ever heard. We're definitely not doing that. So I was like, all right, well, I guess I'm going to go do that. So I spent about 4 years kind of working nights and weekends in my basement, quite literally in my basement, developing the first iteration of the product. And then I sent it out to my good buddy, Mike Wade, who's actually the head of our tech services these days. And at the time, he was the, I don't remember if he was I think he was the technical director at that point at Williamstown Theater Festival before he was the production manager there. And so I sent it out to him to kind of beta test. And he was like, yeah, sure. I'd use this for real. And I was like, all right, great. So I took out a second mortgage on the house and quit my job and started the company.
Wow.
And it was all worth it, eh?
Yes. I tell you, those first months were definitely a nail biter. I gave myself like a 6-month runway to like make some sales and start earning some money. And it took about 5 months and 3 weeks before we made the first sale. So I was polishing up my resume, to say the least. But then it did actually start to click. And it beats working for a living. It is the most fun job I've ever had. So I definitely enjoy it. I get to play with computers and, well, I don't get to do that much playing with it these days, but as a company, we get to play with computers and motors all day long, which is my happy place. So, yeah.
I think that's Anna's happy place as well.
Yes.
I do enjoy it. If you add water, I think that's my happy place. Do all that and then add water.
Just add water.
Just have it be in water. There you go. Yeah, I guess. And before that, if it's of any interest, before that, I was working in the regional theater and I went to school for theater. I was a tech production kid. Went to Ithaca College in upstate New York.
Awesome.
Yeah. What drove you to write the book then? Was it in this process of developing the company, the products, getting requests from people?
I was approached by the editor at that point, Focal Press, as they were looking for somebody to write a book on stage automation. But one of our core tenets has always been, I'm a firm believer in the education of people in the technicality of automation. I kind of bristle at, there is a tendency to treat automation as almost like a wizardry cult, right? Like that it's so complicated that only a select few of us could possibly understand how this stuff works. We like to speak in technical jargon and use a lot of abbreviations and stuff to kind of keep it cloistered. And that is kind of antithetical to how I view it. I think it's absolutely accessible. I don't think it's that complicated. It is, of course, highly technical, but I mean, we're in an industry of highly technical people, and none of this is beyond anybody's comprehension. But it does take it is different. Like it's not the same as structural analysis. It's not the same as lighting. It does have its own little its own vocabulary. It does have its own systems that you have to know about, but I think it's all very accessible if you're interested, right? Like not everybody needs to be interested. I mean, there are the heathens out there that don't want to know anything about automation, but I mean, assuming that you're intrigued by it, like it's completely within your grasp to do it. But I know that when I was learning I'm of an age where it's like, if you were in technical theater, you got an art degree, right? And so like my training is, I took a lot of oil painting, I took figure drawing, I took history of costume and decor, all lovely, right?
Yep.
It's like, and it's lovely knowledge. I enjoy having it. I think it makes me a better rounded person. I use none of that in my day to day, right? Like I would have been much better served by having some electronics classes, some more physics, etc.
You're not doing your system designs with oil paint?
Not anymore.
Crazy.
It seems like it's just a little, it takes too long,
It does the electrical diagram with a fine pen. And
yes, exactly.
Choice of
the shading
there.
is excellent. Yeah, exactly. I have my inspiration board next to me. Yeah. What's my emotional response to this design? Yeah, so I just thought like for the book, what I really wanted to be more like a handbook, kind of modeled on the Backstage Handbook, the great blue or maroon book,
Yes.
where it's something that anybody can pick up and kind of get your knowledge out of it. And obviously, automation is a little more technical than that, but I really wanted it to be more of a practitioner's book that you could. The idea being like, if you're a technical director and you had to automate something and you didn't know what you were doing, but boy, you knew you needed to do it, that it would give you enough knowledge to make an effect move on stage, right? Well, I think it's important to understand the fundamentals. I think that there's a fair use case for folks who just want to kind of know how to operate an automation system. I think that's great. Yeah, obviously, we love to train people how to automate using our equipment. But I also just think it's really, I think that to be good at automation, to be a valuable automation technician, you should understand how these things work fundamentally. And I think that once you do, the thing that trips people up the most about automation is the troubleshooting, because when things work, right? So you're just pressing a go button.
Yeah.
And and that's not that challenging. Of course, automation has a reputation built on when things don't work and when things go wrong, and you have to, you have to have an idea of where to look. And if you understand the principles, it makes it a lot easier to go look in the right places. I think we take a lot of tech support phone calls, and I think after about a decade of taking a lot of tech support phone calls, I was like, what'd be really great is if there was a text that people could read and have some idea of how this stuff works. Because sometimes it does. I speak in hyperbole an awful lot and makes silly comments, but sometimes you answer these questions where it's the analogous of like, my windshield wipers didn't work on my car, so I got a new cat, right? Like people will say things like, well, whatever, this motor's running the wrong way, so I reinstalled Windows. And you're like, well, that doesn't even, that doesn't make any sense, and if you had any. But I understand if it's all completely black box, it's like, well, I don't know how any of this works. So the book was really born out of the desire to help folks understand at a very fundamental level how these things work. And hopefully it does that to some folks. I know it's rewarding to hear when it does help, make a connection for folks who have been interested in the discipline.
Yeah. I'm curious because it sounds like you're obviously extremely passionate about automation. It's your entire career. And you're clearly making an effort to educate other people about it as well. But I'm curious if we can go back to when the moment was that you realized it was automation, because you're a technical production kid. But what was that defining moment that said, this is the path that I'm going down, as opposed to lighting, audio, something else? What was it that drew you to automation?
Yeah, no, that's a great question. I was very interested in, I guess in high school, I was fairly interested in lighting. I think that's not uncommon, no. but as soon as I got into college, I got more taken with the construction aspect. And so I was really, and I thought I wanted to be a technical director. That's what I assumed I was going to do. I was going to go and become like a regional theater technical director somewhere. But then kind of two things happened. One, I did a couple of summers at the Old Globe Theater out in San Diego. In my first summer there, I was working. I was just like, the dopey 17-year-old kid, lowest kid on the totem pole sort of thing. But it's a great company out there. And they take one or two kind of college age folks, but it's mostly professional union carpenters. And I got a chance to work with Lauren Schreiber, who was a phenomenal technical director and later went on to become a great professor as well. But they were doing really challenging work out there. Like they did a lot of, and they still do, a lot of kind of preview work for Broadway, so that they will do fairly big shows with pretty complicated effects. Like and every show that I worked on out there had some number of moving effects. And the second summer I went back and they had even more. We did our first, maybe it's 12 axes or 14 axes sort of show. And it was pretty cool just to see like all the rigging automated and a lot of deck automation and stuff. And they were doing all the automation themselves completely, with a bunch of PLCs and writing their own little queuing systems and so on. And so that was pretty inspiring. And I was like, oh, this seems pretty cool. But also at that point, there was no really opportunity for me to move up. So I moved on to the Alley Theater where I could be in the tech office. And I was like, yeah, well, this is closer to my dream of being a technical director. And that was pretty much the job that cured me of wanting to be a technical director. Because I realized that was not, I mean, I have deep respect for technical directors, but I realized that was not, I did not really want to design, like do construction design all day. And then it also kind of cured me of wanting to work in a regional theater as well, because it was a tough racket financially. So I decided to move on to Mystic Scenic. And at that time, I mean, what was cool was that, this was like, I'm very much dating myself, but this would have been like 96-ish. And automation was really still kind of Wild West. I mean, there were certainly, you had like the Feller Precisions of the world that were doing stuff, and and before PRG, right, Scenic Technologies was doing stuff as well. The predecessor to Show Motion was doing stuff, but it, by and large, there weren't really great established companies at that point. Anyway, so I went to Mystic Scenic, and they were just getting, they were like 100-person operation, and they were doing big, mostly corporate shows, a lot of corporate theater, product launches for Honda and things like that. But when I arrived, they had just done their first like automated turntable, and it had not gone terribly well. And I think there were like 4 computers in the business at that point, and I was drafting, I was doing CAD for them, and the owner was like, "Hey, you seem like you know how to use computers. You think you could write some automation software?" And I was like, "Absolutely, 100% I could." And he's like, "Great, in 6 weeks, we've got another show that's going out, and we need a new automation system. So just go write some software." And so I went to the library and started studying about how to write software. And
just go write some software.
Yeah. He's like, it's just typing, right? Let's just go type up some automation software for us.
Yeah, you're drafting, so
exactly. I mean, that was the thing, like, because he was also like a great technical director in his own right that had opened up the scene shop, but he knew very, very little about computers. But he's like, "Kid, you seem to use computers. We need computers to run motors. I don't see what the big deal is. Why don't you just make it do that?"
Same thing.
And so I guess it was like, the formative years in the regional theater that made me like first see it and be like, that's really cool. The stuff that's moving is really exciting, and that's pretty neat. And then it was that opportunity at Mystic to actually develop an automation system, really just out of ignorance, right? Like that I was given the opportunity because nobody knew better than to let me try, and that was what made it possible.
How did that go?
Oh, it went, it went well for what it was. I mean, it was, but it solved some of their biggest, it's embarrassing to even admit what their big problems were, right? But the biggest problems they had with their first attempt was like, they couldn't save a show file, right? So like the computer just had to keep running all the time. They could only have a maximum of 2 motors in any show. And so like, I had the revolutionary ability to write a thing that could both save a show file and have a limitless number of axes in it. And that was enough to make it successful for that. But it was a scene shop predominantly, right? So they, over the years, I spent about 8 years working there. And their focus was really to do just enough automation to get the scenery. That was where they made their money. And that was kind of in direct conflict with what I wanted to do, because I was always like, but we should just do more automation. And the owner was like, every time we do automation, we lose money. So I would like to do less automation and do more scenery.
But you could see it coming. I feel like you started building. Have you ever played with Lego Mindstorms?
Oh my God, yes. Yeah, of course. Sure.
So I feel like you did that for theater.
Well, that is like one of my best compliments I've ever been paid. Yes. I hope that we have made the Lego Mindstorms for theater. Lego Mindstorms were very, very, are very, very cool. But yeah,
They're very cool.
Yeah, totally. Yeah. I got to, a couple of years ago, I got to be a mentor of my daughter's robotics team in high school. And it was a
That's
huge
awesome.
kick. Yeah. It was very funny because this is total tangent, but like we were around dinner one night and we were talking about the robotics team and stuff. And my daughter says, Dad, have you ever heard of an encoder? And even my wife was like, my God, Isabella, have you listened to nothing of what your father has said? How much do you tune out? Turns out just about everything.
I guess you're not talking about encoders at the dinner table enough.
I think I was probably maybe too much, and she was like, oh, Dad's on about that. Yeah,
no.
Exactly.
Time to stop listening. Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
That's so interesting that like your first foray into automation is developing a new system, basically. And then for your next big career shift to be developing your own system and product with Creative Conners, right?
Yeah.
So was it a similar mindset where you kind of saw a gap in the products that were available and said, I can develop something better or something that fills in this gap? Was it what inspired you to actually make this change, and what is the difference between your system and others?
Yeah, no, I think that's a great question. I mean, I'm sure no small part of it was ignorance, but the thing that was the kind of cornerstone of what we were trying to do was make something that was very approachable and very flexible. It seemed like every theater I went to, and I did see more reinforcement of this at my time at Mystic, because while we did a lot of corporate shows, we also would do a little bit of work in legit theater as well. But especially in the Boston area, like the American Repertory Theater and Huntington Theater and stuff, there would always be some like closet full of motors. And there would be an inspired TD at some point that would have put together a system, but it wouldn't be documented. And they would eventually move on because that's just the way regional theater works. And so what would be left behind for the next guy showing up was like, well, there's this closet full of motors and there's this weird control console thing. Nobody knows how it works. But I swear to God, we did Cabaret with it 3 seasons ago and it worked okay, except for like that button. Don't touch that button. Nobody knows what that one does, but it's bad. And so my inspiration was really more on the control side initially of like, I think it would be cool if we could come up with a generic enough control that, you could just buy like a black box from us that like, has connectors on it, and we publish the pin out, and you can take one of those motors from your closet and, put the right connector on it and plug it in and make it work. Because I could see that people all over the industry were making machinery seemingly pretty well, but controls are super hard. They take a lot of time. And the software side of it, like if anybody was writing software, it was almost always unusable. It just takes so much freaking time to write software and make it decent. So that was kind of the concept. Was like, we'll make a generic kind of build your own system where you can, kind of bring your own, BYOM, like bring your own motor and you can plug it into our system. And I used to joke, but it's only half joking. Like, I think if we could, if we had that with a manual and a phone number, like we would be beating most of the competition. Because like, if you could just document it and pick up the phone, that would be pretty great. And again, like I can't stress enough, like that we were really targeting a different market than I think what everybody else was doing. Like everybody else was going big, and we were like, well, what about smaller? Like, there are hundreds of regional theaters, and who is supplying gear for those folks? Who's even taking notice that they're doing these pretty impressive shows? That was the impetus. I mean, and then over time, what we found was that that's not the only market that cares about having like easy to use, well documented automation equipment with, a kind of doggedly enthusiastic support team that will answer the phone any time of day or night to help you out, But it's still kind of our niche of like, even in the, we do some fairly, we work with some fairly large entertainers these days, production companies, but we still tend to do we have the most impact on the kind of smaller scale stuff. I mean, we have, I can count on, one finger the number of over 100 axis shows that we have in our repertoire. Like we have exactly one client that has that many of our machines out there. But most of the time we're dealing in that kind of like couple dozen axes. So we're not usually the people that are going to be doing the giant shows. Not that we wouldn't love to. We'd love to take your money if you're out there.
Was that your most recent project?
No, the most recent project in Hawaii was a really fun, challenging technical project for us, but it was actually a pretty modest axis count. I think it was 7 axes, but it was just higher speeds and more technical difficulty than we'd had to do in the past. Yeah. No, it's actually fairly vanilla. Like the one that's got about 100 axes, it's like 50 of those are just line sets, right? And then there's like another 20 or 30 that are chain motors. And then there's some lifts and some, like ceiling panels in the theater and stuff. So it's more of a permanent installation for one of your favorite tech companies.
And now a note from our sponsor. The StageLync podcast is proud to be sponsored by Clearcom. Clearcom is the leader in voice communications for theater and the performing arts. Call your cues with the simplicity and elegance of Clearcom intercom solutions. You can find them at CLEARCOM.com. Go check them out.
Can you tell us anything about some of the projects you're working on now?
Yeah, sure. I mean, the one that we just wrapped up in Hawaii's, it's got a bunch of performer flying stuff in it, and that was a pretty great project for us. I think at the moment we can't say exactly who it was, but it's a household name. For us, what was super exciting is it was we'd done a few projects for them before, but we had never done kind of the turnkey full package. So we had made machines before, we'd done some rental projects in the past with them, and technically it pushed us quite a bit. We have kind of our stock lineup of products that we sell, but then we do something around 30% of what we sell is somewhat custom. It's like we try very, very hard not to do anything totally custom, because custom work is a really, really hard way to make a living, but it's kind of based on our stock products. And this time the client liked the kind of form of our basic products. They're like, well, we love it. We're going to just buy some stock products. We just need them to be, higher speed, higher capacity, have these additional safety features, run with different sensors. And you're like, okay, well, so it's nothing like our stock products, but we will there.
So a custom product. Okay.
So we'll use the shell and then another.
Yeah.
But
it was
box looks great.
Yeah, exactly. So that was pretty fun, because there was a bunch of, for us, high speed hoists. So they're like 88 feet per second hoists, for performer flying. And then the had to have for the first time. I mean, again, these are, as I like to joke, there's no technology of the 1980s that we haven't mastered. So like we use a lot of fairly old school technology in what we do. I mean, we do, craft our own circuit boards and we write our own firmware and all this stuff. But the kind of core architecture that we do is actually a pretty well-trod path, that we don't do too much that's really revolutionary. I like to think of how we put it together as more revolutionary, but we're not big risk takers on new tech. So,
hey, if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
Yeah, that's what I like to say, right? So this was our first time moving into doing a job that was all absolute encoders, which again is like, common fare for a lot of automation companies. But we get a lot of mileage out of incremental encoders, and we've done a lot of interesting firmware stuff to get you most of the benefit of an absolute encoder with less cost, and then higher. That's available to everybody, right? So folks who have been using our system since like 2004, when we came out with these new firmware features in 2016, everybody who had old machines suddenly had roughly, had like 80% of the functionality of an absolute encoder on our system just by doing a free firmware upgrade. Anyway, so we had to do category 1 stops. So I'm sure you guys know, but just like for the audience, if anyone's paying attention out there, when I say a category 1 stop, like whenever you moving stuff is really fun. Stopping stuff is absolutely a requirement. And when you stop, outside of a normal motion profile, like when it's not a cued stop, you've either, you've hit some safety sensor, you've hit the e-stop, you've tripped an overload, anything like that, you're going to stop, you're going to abort motion. And the categories of stops there's a category 0, which is basically what they call an uncontrolled stop. So we remove power and slam the brakes immediately. And that's like the kind of traditional e-stop. Like if you go back into a decade or two, that was what everybody was doing, right? You just hit the big red button, it just pulls power, and then all of your safety brakes kick in, and they're spring loaded. So if they remove power, it slams on the brakes. And a category 1 is just, it'll take a programmable deceleration first, and then after some given time span, it will then remove power to set brakes. And of course, you kind of have to have that because, it's great to think that you always want to decelerate a little bit. It's obviously, I guess, why would you do one or the other? Like a category 0 is a very effective stop, but if you're moving 8 feet per second and you've got a performer on the end of the line, it's very dangerous, right? Because it's in a very abrupt stop and it can cause serious injury. It's also very damaging for machinery sometimes, right? If or structure that's holding the machinery, it's just too much dynamic load. But of course, you might not be able to decelerate. Like the reason why you might be in this situation is because the amplifier has failed or something, right? You might have some failure that makes it now impossible to safely decelerate. So you have some settable amount of time where you're like, we're going to try to decelerate, and then we're going to go ahead and slam the brakes. And then there's a category 2, which is not an emergency stop, but where you just decelerate and then leave power enabled to the system. So anyway, this was our first time doing category 1 set of safety circuitry. So it really, and these things are all kind of in the weeds, technical details, but it's the sort of thing that has often separated us from the kind of top tier of projects where people will say like, oh, we loved it. We've heard great things about you. We love SpikeMark, our automation software. Folks will download it and play around. They're like, oh, it seems really easy, user-friendly. They're like, great. So as long as you can do absolute encoders and Cat 1 stops, like we're good to go. And you're like, well, so funny story. If we back that up, we can't do either of those things. So that takes us had taken us out of the running of some of the higher end projects in the past. So that was a really fun project. Right on the floor right now on the kind of, I wouldn't say complete other end of the spectrum, but back into the regional theater world, like we're working on a project for the Cincinnati Playhouse where we're building an 8 foot by 12 foot stage lift, 19 feet worth of travel. And it is like kind of it's a very creative Conner's machine in the sense that it's very modular. It like breaks down. It can be assembled by 2 people. It's all aluminum I-beam and bolt together stuff. And then it's powered by 4 smart chain hoists. So we take CM hoists and stick encoders in them and then plop them onto our stagehand motion controllers. And though what's kind of cool about this machine is that you can use it as an elevator, of course, while you're doing your shows that require a lift. But then when you don't need a lift, like on your next show, if you're running a traditional repertory situation, you might not need a lift in every show. So you can disassemble the lift and you have 4 smart chain hoists that you can use for your rigging after. So it's kind of a 2-for-1. It's a Swiss Army knife. It's not. It's maybe not the greatest of either thing, but it's pretty cool for a theater on a budget to be able to buy one piece of equipment and then have multiple purposes for it. Yeah, and then other than that, we're doing and then we do some amount of kinetic sculpture stuff. We have a couple of artists that we work with fairly regularly.
That's cool.
And so we've got some kinetic sculptures going on, and then at the moment we just got a metric ton of of our actual honest to God stock products. So we do still do an awful lot of that. If folks just call up and place an order for a few deck winches or some hoists and some controllers, and so it's
awesome.
We try to balance out the kind of project-based stuff versus just the regular sales orders because it is a very small team. So we are about 20 people total. And about most of us are in Rhode Island in the facility here. Some are sales folks and stuff and design work throughout the country remote. But as such, it's like we like to punch above our weight, but we do have we do hit a capacity where we can't do a lot of custom work all at once. So it's great to spread that out. And then the stock product work kind of just does pretty much run like a regular manufacturing company here. So it's like those products just kind of come off the line and can get boxed up and shipped.
In terms of your day-to-day, how much time would you say you're spending in design phase versus, flying out for installations versus managing your stock product?
Like me personally?
Yeah, you personally.
Oh yeah. So me personally, I mean, I do almost nothing these days. I mean,
I'm in charge. Yeah.
Yeah. Sadly, I have much smarter people than myself that work for me these days. So they get to do an awful lot of the heavy lifting on the design side. I act more as like a little internal consultant more often than not on that stuff. Where I probably pitch in the most is still on the software side of things. A lot of my time is spent really more in the management side. And honestly, I don't even do that much like going out for installations these days. Because again, we have some pretty great installers. So I talk to a lot of insurance people, and I talk to accountants and lawyers, and I talk to clients.
Ooh.
Yeah. Yeah, it's exactly why I got into this bracket. Yes. It's on the flip side, there are those moments where it's like with the Cincinnati project, for instance, we had most of the team, there were delays and so on with the scheduling. Originally, I was supposed to be going to Hawaii to help with the project installation, just because that was a project where I actually did chip in a fair amount on some of the design aspects. But again, mostly on the software side, and also a bit on the controls. But what with the delays and so on, as is the way with any sort of permanent installation stuff, it ended up overlapping pretty heavily with this next project. And so I ended up not being able to go to that, which left me back in the shop with just a couple of guys to wrangle this next project. So I ended up doing a little bit of kind of project management stuff, and kind of coordinating things out on the floor. But I mean, a Saturday ago, I was in the machine shop, making parts too. So it just depends. But most of the time, I'm the worst person to choose for any of those roles. We have better people for all of those things than myself these days. So yeah, a lot of my time is really spent more on the management stuff and trying to fill the pipeline.
Yeah, that's the dream though, right? To have a team of people that you trust to be able to take care of all those things, and to have so many projects coming in that they're overlapping and you can't make it out to them. Those are really good problems to have.
Absolutely. I yes, we have certainly had the other kinds of problems too, where it's where it's hard to find the work, but we're lucky to be in the situation right now that it's more a challenge of getting the work done. So yeah, no, it's a credit to all the folks that work here, that they are really enthusiastic and very talented people at what they do. So it's a pleasure to work with them.
That's awesome.
Congratulations. It's not a small feat to build a team. I just want to touch quickly on something that we haven't really talked, and because it's automation and Scenic touches, but I think Kat and myself are very attuned with it and might come as a given, but it's not for everyone, which is safety when using automation.
Yes. Yeah. I'm pro safety when using automation.
Good. and that's it. Just leave it there.
Yeah, no, I think that yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
No, I think that's a really deep topic for sure. If I were to try to sum up some thoughts on that, the thing that I think takes people who are getting started or who are junior in the field time to really get their head around is that, safety is not a thing that is layered on at the end. Safety concerns need to be well considered from the outset. One of the things that I think feels maybe a little more daunting and a little more formal than it should at the outset is doing some sort of real risk assessment. And those are, it starts to feel awfully kind of formalized, and I guess in some ways it is. But I don't think that it's a step that really shouldn't be skipped, regardless of what kind of level you're operating at. All of these things are dangerous, which is not a great sales pitch to say, but it's the truth of it, right? But I guess I would say similarly, we're all, even if you're, working mostly in a scene shop, it's like you're working around dangerous equipment all the time there too. It's not a reason not to do something. We all accept a certain amount of risk every day, right? Inside of the scene shop, there's very obvious ones, right? There's the table saws and bandsaws and drill presses and all these things that are very obviously dangerous, right? And we have guards up, we have training, we have different protective measures that we put in place to try to make that safe as possible. And yet accidents still happen, people still get hurt. But we all kind of push forward because we know the risks and try to, reduce them as much as we reasonably can. But we do face the same things, like walking outside, right? Like like crossing the street has its own risks. All of these things have risks. I guess my point just being like, you can't shy away from something just because you're worried that it might have danger, right? It definitely has danger. There is always danger. If you look at any situation, there is some risk associated with everything that we're doing, right? Like you're like, oh, walking outside is dangerous. I'm going to stay inside. Like, great. Well, then like heart disease kicks in, right? Because you're too sedentary. Like all of these things have risks. But if we, get a little less abstract about it, I think it's really essential that people, when they're doing any automated effect, do follow some risk assessment procedure. And I think that it can be pretty well simplified to get down to a very digestible format. In my book, we present one format, but a lot of the, some of the ESTA standards, I think that especially the ANSI E16 standard has a really good appendix talking about risk assessment. So I keep saying risk assessment, but so what does that mean, right? It's like getting together with a group of competent people and looking at the effect and saying, what are all the things that could possibly go wrong that could injure somebody, right? And just having that, even just having that exercise as the first step, I think is hugely valuable because it puts everybody in the right headspace about acknowledging that there is risk, and then just brainstorming on all of the different things that could potentially go wrong, right? And so that's really good and really handy, and I think everyone should do that. But I don't think it's not that much of a leap forward to the next step, which is like, all right, and now let's talk about like how likely is that to happen and what's the severity, right? And you make that matrix up of what's the likelihood, what's the severity, and you have that line of do not cross if we're looking at this in a matrix, right? Of like, well, that is either absolutely going to happen or, it will be catastrophic if it does. And anywhere in that spectrum, we say that's too much, right? And because then the next challenge is just, okay, so what do we do? Right? How do we make this safer? And the best way is to, of course, make the effect inherently safer, right? Like that if you design it in such a way that rather than having to guard against unsafe aspects of it, that it is inherently safer. And that's a great challenge to throw out to a bunch of creative thinkers, right? Because I think everyone does have, most people who work in this industry are naturally creative and naturally good problem solvers. And so if you just task people, you make a space, you make the time, and you put, I think one of the key things is you put people together because we all have our individual blind spots. Mm-hmm. And so having a group discussion about the safety aspects is pretty big portion of this. But then you brainstorm on how do you make it safer. And then if you can only inherently make it safer to a point, then we add in guarding to make it safer still. And then after that, of course, the kind of least effective measure, but it's still a tool in the tool belt, is to have, operational procedures in place to make it safer still. So I guess, if I were to encourage anyone to do anything first about safety, I would say like to engage in that process, to engage in a real risk assessment and risk reduction, like the risk assessment, right? Being that first step of like, how many different ways can this thing hurt somebody? And then the risk reduction of going through that process of like, well, that is the problem, right? That's a shear hazard, right? Where we could sever off somebody's toes if it's sticking out past the lift, or a crush hazard if somebody could be underneath the lift, or an entanglement hazard if the costume could get caught in the winch line. So that's the hazard. Now, how do we lower that possibility, either the possibility or the severity, or hopefully both, right? But so I'd say like, learning a little bit about that process and coming up with a system where, a process where that you execute on that idea, writing it all down is a big deal. And then keeping that, because it's not as though, like with any of these things, it's not like that guarantees you haven't missed something. But should you still have an accident after, you have something to go back to and say, like, so where did we as a group fall down, right? What did we miss? How did this still not work out? And you either find a hole in your logic, or you find where you didn't do what you said you were going to do. And one of those two things has to be the case, right? You either didn't think of you either didn't think it through completely, or you failed to execute. And then you got to do better at this, right? Because we got to, at the end of the day, it's how I make my living. I think it's very serious, but it is a show. It is entertainment. And the idea of somebody getting injured for entertainment is very unsettling, right? None of us want to be doing that. And so I do encourage, we talk a lot about this in the company. We talk a lot about it with people that we speak to in the industry of like performers, I think rightfully assume that somebody is thinking about this. Well, then you damn sure better be thinking about it, right? Because people are trusting that you are competent enough to have done this, right? That you have done these steps. And along those lines, which is, never a comfortable conversation to have, but depending on the situation, you have to be ready to also say, like, we can't do this. Whatever the thing is that, that this effect is too much. And again, kind of in that repertory situation where it's like, you're going to be changing over these shows every 6 weeks, right? And new productions are coming on. And so these production calendars are very, very, very tight. There's not a lot of time for the analysis, right? Which does not get you off the hook. Instead, it cranks it up even higher, right? It's like you really have to do this and you really have to be ready to push back. And I think similarly on the artistic side, people have to be really accepting of if we say no, and it has to be real, right? Like you also can't be a technician who's just like, well, that sounds hard, I'm not going to do it, right? It's like, no. Your job is to do hard things, but we have to figure out the number of times I've walked into a theater, and I certainly wouldn't name names, but that you see like a lift with a sunroof over it, right? Which is like a classic safety mess, right? Of like, there are so many hazards involved when you have a trapdoor over a lift. And there are some very easy, simple things to put into place to make that monumentally more safe. And you'll get you're like, well, why are there no interlocks on this? Why is there no crush protection? Why is there no shear protection? And they're like, we just didn't have time. You're like, well, then you don't have time to do the lift.
Exactly.
Right? Like it is not something that you can eliminate from the equation. You either have the time to do it all, or you get to do none of it.
Yes.
Because these things are really dangerous, and it's not, but it's just not something to be trifled with. And so, and then from a product perspective, we think a ton about this because we want to design things where it's like the obvious way to use it is the safest way. It's not cumbersome to implement the safety, that's the natural way that you do it. And then we take a big responsibility ourselves of that. We probably think more about this than our end users. And so we had better be providing we better be providing the safety equipment that you need, and then making it non-optional, because we
definitely
do work with a lot of theaters that, are stretching their budgets, as it were. And unfortunately, it's very tempting to say like, oh, well, how much, that safety controller, that's an awful lot of money. And you're like, yes, it is. And it is a requirement. Again, like, or better yet, you just don't even itemize it out, right? It's like, this is just part of the package. And it is not an option that you get to subtract and save money. But then like, in terms of like actual implementation, there's a lot of different things, at play, but there's a lot of different safety sensors and, safety controllers and, there's tons of stuff. But I would say again, like I would encourage people to think, those are all really good devices to think about, astragal switches and crush mats and light curtains and load cells. And, all of these things are very important things to consider as sensors to be applied to a design. But I think fundamentally, the goal is make it more inherently safe. And you only do that by understanding what the real hazard is that you're trying to protect against. And, and do that at the beginning of the design phase, not at the end.
also going to be faster and cheaper, likely, to mitigate.
Also, yeah, I 100% agreed, right? Like it's definitely better to, if you're able to do it at the beginning and it's kind of designed in from the outset, for sure. And a lot of times it's not like you're suggesting, it's not as though like these things are inherently, I mean, some of these things are definitely more costly. Safety sensors are more expensive than, not using safety sensors. But some of these other things, just where you put the machine, right? I mean, so many, when we look at entanglement hazards and things like that, it's like, well, let's just not put it there. Like, let's not put it near the performer. Let's get it out, down in the trap, up on the jump, somewhere else, right? And there are those kinds of decisions that you can make that have zero impact on the cost, but huge impact on safety, but just require some thought.
There you have it, folks. Gareth Conner, pro safety.
And so, yes, in conclusion, I would say I am pro safety. Yeah.
It's a stance that we approve of. Now, Gareth, we always end the podcast with the same two questions, which if you've heard it before, you're going to know what we're going to ask. But the first one is, what is your favorite part of your job or the industry as a whole?
Yeah, that's a great question. So without a doubt, like the favorite part, I don't know about the favorite part of the industry because I'm kind of a me monkey, but the favorite part of my job, the thing that I love, the thing that I still enjoy doing more than anything is working on software. I enjoy the heck out of that because it's the only like construction discipline where you can throw it all out and start over with relatively zero cost except time, right? Like you can just kind of keep building the perfect thing and it doesn't cost you any more than your intellect. So I enjoy that.
Oh, good answer.
Yeah. And if you could change anything about your job or the industry, what would you change?
I would like to stop running payroll.
Okay, fair enough. Yeah.
Yeah, in general, like I think the thing that I least trained for in my life was to be like a business administrative person. And that is what I spend more and more of my time doing. And I would love to, personally, I would love to get back to more of the engineering side of things and do less of the management stuff. But I've made some odd choices for that to be my goal. So.
Well, fair point. Good answer. Thank you. Thank you so much, Gareth, for joining us today. This has been a really great conversation. It's been nice to have you on.
It's been my pleasure. Thanks so much for having me.
Thank you.
Thank you for listening to the StageLync podcast. StageLync is an online platform that gives you access and connection to the live performing arts. As a guest, you can read about live performing arts from across the globe and gain insights from performers and artists on stage and all the amazing people who work behind the curtain. If you are an industry professional, StageLync Pro offers jobs, networks, and career support tools, and you can build your own professional profile on the site. As a StageLync podcast listener, you are eligible for 20% off your StageLync Pro membership. Visit us at stagelync.com and when joining, use the code SLPodcast. StageLync, that's Stagelync.com.